Okay, I'm going to have to explain some things before I start this story. It'll be necessary for you to fully understand what happened. I'll try to keep that part short, and I'll also change the names and area it took place in order to keep what happened somewhat private. I feel it's just respectful to do that. I'm a healthcare worker. What I do is I go to the homes of senior citizens who are unable to function completely on their own for whatever reason. Most of the people I've worked for have been blind or unable to move much, so I keep the house clean and plus do other chores, just generally make sure they're taken care of. Also, the area that I live in is extremely rural, so I tend to be working with older people who live out in the country. This one was the strangest assignment I had ever been on, though. I'll quickly explain why. The senior I was taking care of lived in a hollow. There was an actual house sitting on her property, but the house was extremely old and dilapidated. The property was pretty big, though, so she put a trailer in the front yard, and she lived in that instead. The hollow was somewhat isolated, and I had to drive far down a dirt road to get to it. There weren't any streetlights or anything else like that either, so when it got dark there, it got really, really dark. The lady was in her 80s, and her husband had died just a few years before, so she lived alone in the house for years. Her eyesight had recently begun to fail her, and she had a lot of trouble doing much around the house. She did have several children, but none of them could be there with her all of the time, although her one son Mike had gone there to try and take care of her. For a while he lived in the abandoned house, but that was not very ideal. He bought one of those small egg-shaped trailers. I have absolutely no idea what to call them, but he set it in front of the old house, and that's where he stayed. The old house always scared me. It was just so dark and empty. I always used to wonder if someone or something was hiding in there, but that's just me. I get scared of the stupidest things. Mike took care of his mom, but he wasn't exactly a responsible guy. He drank a lot and he liked to use drugs as well. He would be wasted much of the time, and wasn't that much of a help to his mother after a while. So, the other siblings who couldn't take care of her, because they had families and were all employed, decided to hire her a healthcare worker, and that's where I come into the story. First, I want to mention that I really loved this old woman, who I'll call Mary. Yeah, I have a thing for M names, it seems. But she was an extremely kindly old woman who just needed a little bit of help. Other than her eyesight, she was completely fine. Her mental state was great, and she had no big physical issues either. Mostly my job was just to clean the house, make her meals, and things like that. She was always so grateful and kind. Mike, on the other hand, was not someone I cared for much. He was one of those true country boy types. He was a big barroom brawling kind of guy. He listened to Hank Williams Jr. and that sort of music. Well, except when he was drunk. Then, for some reason, he switched from that sort of stuff to bluegrass. The worst thing about Mike, though, was that he always drank himself silly and was just so hard to deal with when he was like that. Furthermore, it could create a lot of problems for his mother, Mary. I wasn't supposed to work in an environment where there were drugs and alcohol, so technically, I should have been forced to leave the job. But I just couldn't do that to the kind old lady. I convinced myself that as long as he kept the drugs and alcohol just to his trailer, that was completely fine. He did often eat dinner with his mother, and he wasn't allowed to bring any beer in there while I was there. So, this is what happened. Sorry if the background was a bit too long, but it really does explain what was going on. It was dark, and I had just prepared dinner. Mary wanted Mike to eat with her that evening, so 15 minutes before the meal was done, she asked me if I could go over and tell him that dinner would be ready soon. I walked out, and walked over to the little trailer and knocked on the door. There was no answer, so I called out. "Hey, Mike, dinner will be ready in 15 minutes, and your mom wants you to come over and eat with us." "I'll be there in a few minutes," came a muffled reply. Yeah, he was obviously drunk. I walked back to the house and decided to finish up making the meal. During the entire time I was working on it, Mike did not come over to the bigger trailer. Before I set the table, I walked back over. I assumed maybe he had passed out or something. "Mike, your mom wants you to come for dinner," I called out. "It's ready now." "I'll be there in a minute," he repeated. Still sounded weird and likely wasted. I went back over to the house and set the table up. I gave Mary her meal, and she asked what was going on with Mike. I had to tell her that I went over there twice and asked him, and he kept telling me he would be over in a minute. It was around that moment when I heard what sounded like the door to the trailer open and close. Mary heard it too, so we both assumed that Mike was finally coming over to have dinner. I began to make him a plate, but Mike didn't come over. He didn't come over while I was making the plate. He didn't come over in the several minutes following. He didn't come over even while Mary had already begun eating her meal. It was weird because I was sure I had heard him just leave the trailer. "Hey Mary, I'm gonna go check on Mike," I told her. He told me he was coming over twice, but I have no idea what's going on. I went out the door into the dark country night. There was a little bit of light coming from the porch of the big trailer. The little one, though, was completely dark. I have to admit I was a little bit afraid as I walked over to it. It wasn't just because it was dark, but I got a weird feeling from this situation, and I worried that maybe Mike had gotten really drunk and hurt himself somehow. If he had to go to the hospital, my employer would find out he had been drinking, and I would be taken out of the household. I walked up to the little trailer and knocked on the door, but there was no answer this time. "Mike, are you coming over for dinner now?" I called out. I waited again, expecting to hear him tell me he would be there in a minute, but no response came from him. I knocked again. Nothing. I began wondering if he had stumbled out into the hollow or something. First, though, I decided to check the trailer. The door was unlocked, and I entered for the first time in my life. God, it was filthy. It was covered in beer cans, whiskey bottles, dirty clothes. It smelled like crap. I couldn't understand how anyone could live in such a place. I searched for the light switch and turned it on, but what I saw scared me more than I had ever been scared in my life. Mike was lying there on the floor of the trailer, surrounded by a huge puddle of blood. His chest had been ripped open, and his eyes were staring up dead. Someone had murdered him. Terrified, I ran out of the small trailer and toward the bigger one. I shot my eyes around, expecting to see someone come out of nowhere and try to kill me. I made it to the big trailer safely, and I was relieved that Mary was sitting there unharmed. I went and called the police. Now this is the scariest part of what happened. When the police arrived, I told them everything. The paramedics told them that Mike had likely been dead for a long time. This was confirmed by the coroner. Mike had been dead for hours before I found him. And that is when I realized two things. Whoever I kept hearing tell me that they would be in the house in a minute was most likely the killer, because it could not have been Mike. And whoever I heard open and close that door, that was the killer too. We didn't know who killed Mike. He was involved with a lot of drug dealers and less than noble people. Whoever did it slunk off into the hollow and was never found to my knowledge. I remained Mary's healthcare worker for the next 2 years before she passed away too. I almost quit because I was scared the murderer would return, but I liked Mary enough that I wanted to do whatever I could to help her. Sorry if this story sounds sort of typical. I guess in a way that it does, but it was pretty scary too. This happened at a night when I was hanging out at a friend of mine's house. We both lived in the country, maybe just a couple miles from each other down a gravel road. We had lived there all our lives, and we had grown up as best friends. During the summer, I was staying there late playing video games. Normally if I stayed too late, I would just spend the night over there, but for some reason, this night, I didn't feel like sleeping over there. I was really wanting to be sleeping in my own bed for some reason. It was about 1 in the morning when I decided I was going to go and walk all the way back to my house. The walk was something I had done 1,000,000 times. As I mentioned, we had been friends for a long time, and we hung out all the time as well. It was, of course, very dark outside as I was walking over to my place. The moon was out that night, but it wasn't full. Still, it provided a little bit of light at least to be able to see with. As I was walking, I thought I heard another set of footfalls taking place on the gravel of the road. I listened to it for a few moments before I stopped walking. There was no sound when I stopped, so I looked around and didn't see anything. I began to walk again, and it wasn't long before I once again heard what sounded like someone else walking on the gravel road. If you've ever walked on gravel before, you would understand the sound I'm talking about. It's very distinguishable. I stopped again, and once again the sound stopped as well. I was a little scared at that point, but I also realized I had been a little scared before I even thought I heard the sound. I mean, I was walking down a dark country road in the middle of the night all by myself. I should be a little scared. I began walking again, and after a few moments, the sound behind me began back up. I tried to ignore it, tell myself it was all in my head, but I just couldn't convince myself of that. This time, I stopped, but when I did, the sound continued. I knew now it was not my imagination. I was hearing someone else walking around out there. It wouldn't really matter if it was just someone else out for a night walk, but whoever it was had stopped twice already when I had stopped, so they deliberately were trying to get me to not be able to discover they were out there with me. I turned around, and that's when I saw him. There was a man standing a bit back, away from me on the road. I couldn't make up much about him because it was so dark, but it seemed he was standing there and staring at me. Suddenly, he began to move. I can only explain his movements like this. If you've ever seen the original A Nightmare on Elm Street, at the beginning when Freddy is chasing Tina, he crouches down a bit, spreads his arms out, and runs at her while flailing his arms. That's what this person did, and they were running straight at me. I turned around and took off down the road. I ran as fast as I could. I thought I could hear him running after me on the gravel, but I didn't dare look back to see what he was doing. I always thought if you took the time to look back at someone who was chasing you, you increased your chances of getting caught. It wasn't until I got home that I took a chance to see how close the guy was behind me, but once I looked back, he was gone. I didn't bother to try and find out what happened to him. I just got into my house and locked all of the doors and windows. When I think back on the story, I often think it was just someone fucking with me. If someone really wanted to hurt me, why would he have not continued to chase me? So maybe it was just an older teenager just getting his jollies. I don't know, but if you could have seen the guy running after me like that, you would have run away too, because it was scary as fuck. You always hear about how people in the country never lock their doors. Well, I have to say that's bullshit, but I do have to admit that when we're home, we often leave our windows open, even while sleeping. I mean, my dad doesn't much care for paying for air conditioning, so unless it's deathly hot outside, that's the only way we're going to get any relief from the heat. Assuming there's a breeze anyway. But yeah, we still get some fresh air out here, and don't really need to worry like people in the city. It's not all that surprising that at the end of last summer, I was in my room on my laptop watching, well, videos, with the window open. We're kind of far from town. We're too far to get delivery from all those great delivery food apps I'm always seeing people talk about. But we're close enough that it only takes 10 minutes or so to run in and grab a burger if we really want one. So, you know, we're kinda rural. Anyway, I was in my room, not too long after my parents had gone to sleep. I just figured I'd find something to watch and was enjoying myself a bit, when I suddenly saw the strangest thing out of the corner of my eye. There were some weird flashing lights outside. I closed my laptop reflexively and pulled out my earbuds, but I didn't hear anything. The street we live on is very secluded. Very few houses are around, and a lot of lots are just wooded area. We have a large corner lot bordered by woods on two sides. My bedroom is in the back corner of the house, so I have a window by my bed that looks out into the backyard and our back porch. Then I have a window that looks out on our side yard, and beyond that a road. Across the road is just some more woods. I think there used to be a house there, but it was torn down long ago, and nature was taking over again. I sat my laptop down and got off the bed, going to the window that looked out at the street. I couldn't see anything, just one single streetlight toward the front of the house, otherwise complete darkness. I figured maybe I'd imagined it, or even that it had come from the website I was on instead. You know, those ads can get pretty crazy sometimes, and I was pretty invested in that video. I shrugged it off and went back to my bed. Slipping between the sheets, I popped in my earbuds and picked up my laptop, preparing to pick up where I left off. And once again, my room was filled with these flashing lights. This time, I saw the movement of them going down the road. I realized they were red and blue. Police lights, I wondered? There were no sirens, though. I slipped out of bed again, preparing to go to the side window, when I glanced toward the window by my bed. The lights were headed that direction and were illuminating the back porch. In surprise, I slipped backward and fell on my ass. There was a face at my back window. It was only inches from where I had been lying, watching my videos. It was a man, older than me, probably my dad's age, but I couldn't really tell. He had a shaved head and tattoos on his face. He was leering at me. I had no idea how long he had been there. There had been nothing between us but the screen on my window, which I realized now was open. He didn't say anything. He just smiled at me, half of his teeth missing like some meth head. I scrambled back to my feet and out my bedroom door, screaming for my dad. My dad came out of the bedroom in his shorts, with a shotgun in hand, my mom calling, "Be careful," behind him. I slid to a stop in the hallway and gestured toward my room. "There's a crazy guy outside my window," I managed to say, without missing a beat. My dad went straight to the back door that led to the porch the man would be standing on. I followed him as he pulled it open and stepped outside. I looked out the door behind him as he stepped firmly onto the porch and held up the gun. There was no one there any longer. "Come near my house again and I'll blow your head off," my dad shouted into the night. There was no response. After a moment, I slipped out behind my dad and went over to my window. It had looked a little odd from the door. My dad followed me, and we both saw that what had looked odd was that the bit of the screen that was hanging down had obviously been cut with a knife. My dad suddenly ran back into the house, and it dawned on me that the man may have gone inside. I followed him as he searched the entire house, but there was no sign of him. As we searched, the police car pulled into our driveway. The same flashing lights lit up the night as multiple cars pulled up along the road. My mother had called them as we tried to take care of the situation ourselves, but it turns out they'd already been in the neighborhood. I stood on the porch with my father as we explained what happened. I gave them a description of the guy, and we showed an officer the back window as others went to search the property. There was a burst of excitement from the woods across the street when a group of officers exited the woods with a man in cuffs. That same man. The bald man with the tattooed face that I could now clearly see was wearing a prison jumpsuit. They put him in the car and took him away. He was smirking the entire time. The officer who had been asking me questions explained that the man had broken out of the local jail recently. He was suspected of raping and murdering a teenage boy. I thought back to hearing that some boy in my school had met a horrible fate lately. It was just one of those things you hear about some kid you don't really know. You didn't hear about that kind of thing around here often, though. It had to be the same guy, didn't it? Had he been watching the videos over my shoulder? Was he just looking for a place to hide, or had he been after me specifically? I was suddenly very happy I'd still been wearing my shorts this whole time. We've since replaced that screen, but I don't open that window anymore, and I moved my bed up against a different wall. Even knowing he's back in jail, and even if the trial puts him in prison, I'm not sure I'm ever going to feel comfortable again, though. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. That sort of stuff really helps me out with the audience engagement and really helps my videos get out to a lot more people. So hopefully we can get to that 1 million one day. Help me out, guys. That'd be great. Once again, starting this week on the second channel, we're going to be doing some true crime stuff. Probably twice a week if I feel in the mood for it and feel like doing all the research required. Those will be on Wednesdays/Thursdays and Saturdays/Sundays probably. So look forward to that if you're interested. There's a link to my second channel in the description. The name is Mr. Blue Sky, so keep an eye out for that. If you guys feel like contacting me for any reason, links to all of my social media will be in the description below, including my Facebook, Twitter, and Gmail accounts. Send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get back to you as quickly as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, please make sure that it has proper grammar, and try to include as much detail as possible so it's long enough for me to include in a video. Also, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is, if it has one, what type of story it is, if it has a theme, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. If you guys are curious about the art used in this video, links to my artist, Alan, will be in the description below. He does a lot of horror art stuff, and he's really good at it. He also does commissions, so if you guys have any projects you want to work on or something, please be sure to check him out. He can probably get you something really good. As usual, links to the music used in the video will be in the description below in the order which it appears. I think that's pretty much all for now, guys, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.